So thank you for joining us for our second podcast for our Women in Life Science podcast. Today I have Rachel Russell, who is our Market Access Policy and Methods Director at Pfizer. I'll let you introduce yourself and then we'll jump straight in.
Lovely to be here, Tina. Thank you very much. So yes, I'll just tell you a little bit about my career journey and how I got to be in the role that I'm in, because it's very non-traditional.
Okay.
So my background is actually as a research scientist. So I spent more than 20 years in the lab as a lab rat and absolutely adored the type of work that I was doing and progressed up the levels gradually over time until I became the head of plate-based pharmacology for Sandwich, for the Pfizer department in Sandwich. And then Pfizer decided to move its plate-based pharmacology to the US. And I made the decision at that point, having reached what I thought would be my career goal.
Yeah.
By the time I retired to be head of the department, that I would pivot and not go to the US. It was not right for me and my family, and I think it's really important as women we make those choices about how you manage work and life.
Absolutely.
And I was also part way through an MBA at the time as well. So I made the decision then that I would pivot and move into more of a commercial role and move out of research. But you need to develop a new network of people. So I took a role in Pfizer's internal consulting team and spent a little bit of time with them. And then that gave me a fabulous way to build my new network of colleagues across the whole of the commercial business. I then took another little pivot. So we call them squiggly careers at Pfizer, lots of sideways moves into international developed markets for medical affairs, where I was the director of business operations. And then my last job came to me rather than me finding it. And that was the health and value department. And they asked me whether I would be interested in joining them. And I said, but health and value is full of health economists. That's not me. But they wanted somebody who was interested in strategy and innovation and thinking a little bit differently. And they wooed me and in I went. And I've spent a lovely time in there. I spent the first 4 years looking after our submissions for NICE, AWMSG and SMC. So they're the reimbursement agencies across the nation. And then in January, I took my new role, which was Market Access Policy and Methods, which still sits in that group. And that's where I find myself today.
Fantastic. That's amazing that they sort of came to you as well. That's really lovely. Brilliant. So in terms of obviously the career that you've taken, as you say, you started off research scientist. It's gone a sort of completely different way. But who is it that inspired you to start this kind of career?
Okay, so my career, I had two people who really inspired me in my career.
Okay.
The first one was actually my mother. And it was all for probably the wrong reasons. She was never allowed to follow the career that she wanted. It was a very different time then. I think she's in her 80s now. Very different set of opportunities for women. And she wanted to be in science, but couldn't. And I think that somehow that got into my psyche. And when I found that I really enjoyed biology at school, I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do something in science because we can now.
Yeah.
I didn't have a role model though as to where to go and what to do, but I just followed the things I loved. And that's where I went. And then the second role model I had was actually, I worked at Wellcome to start with, which is a pharmaceutical company that was taken over by Glaxo. They merged.
Yeah.
And when I finished at Wellcome, I'd realised it was very male dominated in terms of the hierarchy. But I got a job at Pfizer, and my first boss, who led the department I was in, was a woman. And it gave me a very different take on what you were capable of achieving, where you could go, what you could do. And her name was Val Alabaster, and I'll never forget the opportunity she gave me and the fact that she looked for gender parity and all sorts of things that are modern today, she was already thinking and doing.
Brilliant.
And she was definitely an aspiration for me.
Good. That's really nice that so early on in your career you had an inspiring woman for you that sort of early on.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Amazing. Now, on the kind of flip side of that, what would you say are the biggest challenges that you've faced as a woman within this industry or in business in general?
I think at the beginning, almost every meeting I would ever go to in my everyday life and career in science as a pharmacologist was a room full of men. So I didn't have that many peers who were women. There were some, but they were in the minority. And as a consequence, when you wanted to have a chat, it was about music or football or cricket or the wires on their gadgets or I don't know, odd things that really didn't tick my box.
Yeah.
So, I just, that can be quite a lonely time. So you have to find out people that you can connect with.
Yeah.
Because you can't talk about work all day long.
No, you're right. So when you were in the sort of big rooms of mostly men, what was the kind of split of men to women?
I could say honestly, sometimes I was the only woman in a room.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, it was predominantly men.
Interesting. Okay. So we've spoken about what the challenges are that you faced. What would you say are the most positive changes you've seen that impact women in the workplace?
I would genuinely say that Pfizer has a lot of policies in place to help women. So they have a senior women's program. They've done unconscious bias training for people. We have flexibility workshops so that people realize that you need to adapt your day around your needs of your children at the same time.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on to support women in their early careers. And that I definitely think has made a massive difference to people because they feel supported. And the more supported you feel, the more comfortable you are. But there's no point in having policies if it's not ingrained in the culture. So you really have to make sure and work from top down and bottom up that the culture is about gender parity, it's about feeling an equal and being listened to. And I generally think that a lot of companies are moving in that direction now. Certainly the big pharma companies anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really good to hear that, there's some actual actions that have been taken to support women in the workplace. It's not just having a conversation, but as you say, you've got this certain sort of groups that they can join as well and the flexibility. So that's really good to hear.
Yeah. And alongside that, there are colleague resource groups focused for women.
Fantastic.
Which are very, very helpful. There are mentorship programs for women, which are really supportive all the way through the organisation. And you'll evolve your mentors based on what your request is for support and what level you're at. They'll evolve.
So that's from the bottom up then?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
You just need to ask and you will be provided with a mentor.
Good. Okay. Well, I guess that's, definitely some big steps considering, as you was sort of mentioned about when your mother sort of wanted to get into science, not being able to take that career, and now it's, evolved that far. That's really brilliant. And as a woman, what would you say is the best piece of advice that you've been given?
The best piece of advice, I think, is just to follow where you want to go, where your love is, where your passion is. But you need to marry passion with ability. Because, I love playing netball, but I really don't have that much ability. I'm never going to make it as a netball player, but it's a great way to chill. So as long as you have passion and ability, then you've got, the opportunity to succeed. And that's what someone, I remember listening to people saying, just follow your heart, do the things that you're good at, and you will succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Very inspiring. And if you were to speak to a younger woman who was looking to get into the industry, what piece of advice would you give to them?
If they were, for example, thinking about taking a degree, where do I go? What do? I would probably tell them to take a sandwich year. A degree with a sandwich year placement. If they were looking to do an apprenticeship, then you get the experience as you're going along. But it's very difficult. Positions are competitive. And as a consequence, it's the small things that will differentiate you. So anything that you can show in terms of why you love and want to do this job role, I think is helpful to get you over the line, because you're going to be compared against people who have the same skill sets as you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very, very good advice. Thank you. And when do you feel the most empowered as a woman in life science or in business?
I can genuinely say, actually, I feel empowered with the projects that I'm given to do. I think if you've got clear goals and objectives, you know what you're being asked to do. As long as you're given the freedom to operate and to learn by mistakes at times, then I think you can fly. But you need that freedom to operate. You need to be given permission to press ahead with the project without having to check in all the time.
Yeah, so you'd say the freedom is probably quite a key point there.
It is
to feel empowered.
You have to have empowerment.
Yeah, absolutely agree on that, 100%. And on that, how do you think we can, as women, best support the other women around us?
Well, we've already mentioned the mentoring piece, so
Yeah.
I genuinely think that that's a really useful thing to do. I do encourage a lot of women to do it. But now that we're allowed back into the office, it's easier to just check in with people, see how they're doing. I feel like culture plays a big part in allowing people to succeed, and having those touch points. Whilst we had the pandemic, it's a lot of the virtual touch points, but you really need to do those, because you can bounce ideas off, you can tell people about scenarios that you're going through, you can test a few ideas, and it just gives women the confidence. It's okay. And sometimes you do feel a little bit vulnerable, and it's nice to be able to bounce those ideas off people. So I would use your peers as much as you can.
Okay, fantastic. And how can we best enforce gender equity across life science, across business in general?
Having pay parity is always a good place to start.
Yeah.
But I think, as I said, it is a reflection of the culture of the company that you're in. It's a reflection of the policies that exist that are there to support that gender parity. But it has to be both top down and bottom up to be successful, though. You really have to have people who can live it and believe it. And you have to stand your ground. You have to call things out when it's not right. But I also think you can forgive and forget as well. So there are people who genuinely make mistakes. But if you call it out and you explain why, then I think that's okay.
Okay, brilliant. Do you ever feel like being a woman in this industry has put you at a disadvantage?
Sometimes I think I put myself at a disadvantage. It's through doubt.
Right.
So that is something that I think the women have to get over. It's part of our personality traits. Some women are very driven and outgoing or whatever, but I would always question. I would always put myself, am I good enough? Can I do this? And I don't think I'm alone in thinking that. I think many of my peers feel exactly the same. Yeah. So I think that is something that we have to get over. And we have to understand that we are not going to succeed in everything. So it's about, can you learn from the mistakes? And the higher up you go, you also have to be able to take constructive criticism. And some people just find that incredibly difficult to do. So those are the type of things that I feel I've had to try and address and teach myself. It's okay not to get everything right, but you have to keep giving it a go. And alongside that, you have to learn to listen well.
Absolutely. Okay, brilliant. And are there any changes that you would like to see in the next, let's say, 5 years for women in the workplace?
Yes, I think it's slightly more complicated than just gender.
Yeah.
So I think we now need to really think about the intersectionality with with ethnicity, with LGBTQ. It's all about, how do we make everybody feel comfortable with who they are, so that they can operate in the best way that they can. Absolutely. I want people to turn up to work being them.
Yeah, definitely.
Just who they are. And then I think we will succeed and get the best out of people. So I think it's a little bit more of an evolution than just the topic of gender is the way that it will need to go as we progress.
Yeah. And how do you think we're going to get there? What do you think we need to do to get to that point?
So many of the things have sort of parity with the things that we are doing around gender. It's making sure that people feel included, that you have the right culture, the right policies in place. And I loved it when we started to bring in the flexibility workshop and we had men as allies. I think it's a lot of that type of thing that needs to go, but you have to realize it's not as simple as one thing or another. They're all very interconnected. It's a web, and we need to let everybody just be an individual, and then we'll get the best out of them at work. And if we do that, I think that the productivity of a company will just grow when people have that freedom to operate.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more question from me. obviously you've mentioned how Pfizer are fantastic at supporting women and encouraging gender equity and equality in the workplace. If there's one thing that you think other companies in the industry should take from Pfizer, what would that one thing be?
Wow, that's a big question. Obviously, every company is so different, and I'm sure that they have lots of wonderful things that they do. But the one thing I think that Pfizer is now doing is it's putting stuff out in the public domain. So it's not just about thinking about its culture and what it's doing internally. It's being very open so that people who are looking in and wanting to see whether they want to join can see. We publish our gender parity figures. We publish the pay, what levels people are at. That, I think, says a lot if you've got the courage to be able to do that. So I would encourage other companies to at least have a think about it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for doing the podcast with us today. It was really great to speak with you and understand your career and sort of how you're viewing gender equity at the moment. So it's been really great to have you today.
Thank you for having me.
You're more than welcome.